This is Uncharted, a series of candid conversations about facing uncertainty. When we are called upon to be courageous, the strength of our leadership is tested. Red Direction has developed a library of resources to help you stay aligned, and in particular to develop your true north. Now, here's Jess.
I am glad to be back with you in this Uncharted series. Today, Andy Podner, who is joining me, focuses on providing customers with technology support and solutions using a business-first approach. With a decade of executive experience in supply chain, technology, and distribution, he's bringing solutions that drive business performance to companies like yours. Now, I have to tell you, I have known Andy now for, has it been like almost 2 years now, Andy?
I think it's actually been a little bit more, yeah.
We have just passed that mark, I have to admit. We have just passed that mark. And when I met you, you were not on the path you are on now.
Definitely not.
No, you were not. You were like, I think I want to do this thing and build this business. And talk to me.
Well, it was an idea, right? I was at a convention centered around the space that we're in, and I got into a conversation with some folks, and I had always felt there was a need for, I don't know, sort of a high service, non-traditional approach to technology consulting. I've been through several consulting engagements over the last several years, and it always like, here's 25 pages and a bill for 30 grand. And I'm like, well, but I can't really do anything with that. So we kind of had this idea that we would endeavor to just do things and not talk about doing something, say, hey, this is our idea. This is how we think we can make your business better. And we have the horsepower to actually bring it to life. And so that's kind of been that's what we call our business first approach, right? It's saying, hey, let's focus on the business. Now let's go build some technology that fills that void.
Yep. Because in some sense, everybody's business issues are the same, right? They all have certain things that are in common throughout the business, yet the way that the business has approached those things is incredibly different.
Yeah, absolutely. We're predominantly work around distribution, industrial distributors, some manufacturing, and distribution businesses all functionally are basically the same. You buy stuff, you warehouse stuff, you sell stuff, you ship stuff out. That's the cycle. But every person that we work with, every leader, they all look at their businesses very differently from each other. What gives them competitive advantage? What makes them better than their competitor or whatever? And so it's trying to extract that vision from them and put something in front of them that aligns with that, so they can actually, feel like their technology is aligned with their vision of their business.
Yeah. And most of your clients have international partners or vendors or suppliers.
So yeah, a lot of them do. In fact, that's been a huge topic as of late, as I'm sure you could imagine with everything going on this little blue planet of ours.
Yeah, I know. It does seem pretty small right now. Calling it a little blue planet. It's the smallest I have ever felt our planet to be. Right. I have a bucket list so long, and then I'm like, I'm like in the shape of my office. Just fine right now. Just fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, so when we've got those things in our business where we are working with either directly with or are in some capacity, these international business points, and we're in a place where everybody is doing something different, how do we respond to this global crisis? It's creating not even fear in my mind. It's panic at this point. Are you experiencing that as well?
Personally, or just
no, in general, with the space that you're in and your clients?
Well, I was going to answer yes to both.
Okay, I was going to make it easy first before we get to
No. I mean, that's fine. Look, so there are so many variables in the equation right now. Nothing is taking place in a vacuum, right? So, that's right. So I'll give you a great example. Today, we're working with a client, and they have an extremely elongated supply chain. It's 5 months. Whatever decision you make today, you don't see the result of that 5 months from now, which means everything that's going to happen in their supply chain, that course was set and baked in months ago before any of this ever started. So now what?
Yeah.
Right. And everybody feels like there's going to be a downturn, a recessionary effect. And I think what makes it really weird is it's not a general downturn. Okay. We work with people in medical. You can imagine what that's like right now. They have the opposite problem. But we work with people in industrial, and they're having an issue where we've seen businesses in a matter of 2 weeks, their business drop off 34 to 50%. And that's, we're not even working with like restaurants or service or anything like that. I couldn't even imagine what that would be like right now, because that's just going from 100 to 0. And so I think a big part of the challenge is trying to say, yes, we have intuition, we have emotions about our business and all of those kinds of things, but we've got to find some data that we can marry up with these anecdotes and intuitive feelings and things like that, and say, okay, look, we don't really know what's going to happen, but we're going to have a plan and pick a path.
Right.
And so that's a lot of what we're trying to spend time doing. And so the exercise we went through today was we had enough data to be able to model exactly what happened during the 2009-2010 recession. We felt like this is going to be about half the length, and we hope only about half the depth. So what does that look like? But it's going to have a much faster drop.
Yeah.
And then, it's not really going to be a historical U. It's going to have this kind of weird shape to it. And so
like we all jumped off a cliff.
Yeah.
And
And then you have to try to climb up at an angle, right? So,
yeah.
So, we build these different models, and we put them all in line graphs and set them in front of the client and say, okay, look, now let's take a marker and draw a line through where we think it's going to be, because we have to go back and reevaluate all your forecasts and get this plugged in so that we're not overstocking inventory and we're protecting cash flow and all this good stuff. So these are things that you just, you're almost making them up as you go, right? There's not really a roadmap for a lot of this stuff. So in some instances, it's panic. In some instances, it's very somber. I've had personally the entire range of emotions, right? I mean, just
you have
denial, anger, fear, all of it. And at some point you just decide you're not going to be a victim anymore, and you just want to move forward. And that's what we've just tried to focus on, is what the task is in front of us.
Now, anything that you do is not 5 months long. You can put it in place and see it pretty quickly in your business today.
We can, the challenge for us, we can. Now, the challenge for a lot of our customers with long supply chains is then it's not just them, right? Now we have to get into their supplier's head and say, okay, look, all this stuff that we said, hey, go do this for the next 5 months, we got to rewire all of it. And some suppliers are really good about that, and some are not great. And that's just, there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a supply chain behind the supply chain, right? So they're going to manufacture this part in China, but they got to procure the steel to make that part out of in advance. And once they're locked in, they've spent the cash on that. They got to make the part and ship it. They really can't afford to just sit on it. So, again, nothing happens in a vacuum. And so you've got to really be able to play it all the way forward. And in a lot of cases, we're not trying to affect what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 months. We're just trying to say, well, we know we're going to have a bubble of stuff. Let's not make it any worse. That's all you can do.
We were reviewing your bio at the beginning, and do you know what I forgot to tell everybody when I actually read it out loud? That you're the CEO and founder of Atlas Precision Consulting.
Well, thanks. It's a small detail.
It's a small detail, but I'm going to put it right here, right? Put it right here. And you're watching your clients go through this and understanding that, I can't imagine. I thought I had a long process. I can't imagine 5 months of knowing that they are making a plan and sticking to it, not having any idea what's going to happen almost a half a year from now. And so being able to have data, that you're bringing in, being able to have information that you're able to show them, gives them potentially more information to work with. Am I correct in that? So that they have a little bit better idea of where they might be pointed?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a lot of what we're trying to do right now. Look, I am not an economist, and I am not an expert by any means. I gather as much information as I can from economists that I trust, and I buy into the things that I think are middle of the road and sensible. As I tell people, we're not going to be right. We will either be wrong or lucky, because there's no way to predict this really. But what we can do is say, okay, let's work within a reasonable range. Let's figure out what we think the best thing that's going to happen is. Let's figure out what doomsday looks like.
Yeah.
And then let's plug in 3 or 4 more scenarios and see what that looks like. And, like when there's a hurricane, right? I know you don't get a lot of those in Colorado, but
we hear about those things.
Some of the rest of us actually have to deal with that. But when you see a hurricane coming and they put up the spaghetti model, where there's like, they've got 25 computer models and then they put a cone around it and say, okay, we think this is, that's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Is we're kind of throwing a spaghetti model together of saying, okay, we have all these different assumptions. Now where's the cone? Where do we think the eye is going to hit? And we've just kind of taken that approach. And I won't be able to tell you for a year whether it was good, bad, or otherwise, but it makes sense. And it's a yardstick that we can plan by. And really what we're looking for is directionally, are we all in agreement on where this is going? And it really started with doing it for ourselves.
And that was going to be my next question, right? Yeah. I know we've been talking about your clients and the things that they're facing, even in your organization. You have been doing some of those same models.
For sure. That's actually where we first started it. And it was like, okay, well, this is pretty simple. We can put this together relatively quickly, because we can argue whether it's 32% or 37%, but that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's somewhere in here, right? Yeah. And we know there's going to be a plus minus on it, so don't get too hung up on the detail. But we looked at it. We were doing our own cash flow planning. We were trying to figure out, look, I have 2 goals. Okay, don't go out of business. Don't lay people off. That's where I am.
You only have 2 goals right now? Say those goals again.
That's it. Don't go out of business. Don't lay anybody off. If I get through all of this and we've accomplished those 2 things, that's a win. That's a total win for me, because we're a young company. We are a discretionary spend item in a lot of cases. And so we have to work really, really hard not to get chopped out of the budget. And so that's where we're looking to bring that type of value, where people look to us as a partner and say, hey, yeah, this makes sense. We need to continue to use this at some level. So that's how it all started, right? Of what's the worst that could happen? What if these projects go out? What if these come in? And we looked at all of that and I said, okay, well, I'm going to draw a line right through the spaghetti model and say, this is my plan. Mm-hmm. And this is what I'm going to plan off of. And we'll check, against the plan and make sure we're doing right. We redid our budget, every GL account, everything. Mm-hmm. Everything got redone. We needed to understand what our new break-even points were after we made changes to get ready for this and all of that. And that's what we're looking at right now. It's our post-coronavirus budget. That's what it is.
That's exactly what it is. And when did you decide that you really needed to start thinking about this, that this was going to impact your business? When did you know?
When I saw, I guess it was probably a month ago, maybe 5 weeks. It was the point at which Twitter had pulled out of South by Southwest. And
I remember that day.
Yeah.
That was a big day.
Well, and I'm like, that's weird. And I start looking and I'm seeing all kinds of private companies getting ahead of the curve to rein people in. We're not talking about just the tech space. I mean, GM, Ford, Chrysler, JP Morgan, a lot of these companies were here restricting travel. And we started looking at it. The first few calls I made to convert in-person meetings to virtual meetings, that was weeks before they were talking about travel restrictions and stuff like that, apart from the ones in China or whatever. And so it was like, it almost felt like we were a little bit early, but when that travel's 3 to 4 weeks out, you're either going to be ahead of the curve or you're not, or you're going to be way behind. So we decided to be a little bit proactive about it. And I started looking at it and I was like, okay, look, what is this going to cost me? A half a day to sit down and think this through and just scratch it down on a piece of paper and set it to the side. And if it starts to come to fruition like a week later,
I know.
Then we'll take it more seriously and we'll refine it some more. And so that's what we did. I don't want to be in a position to make decisions from panic.
Right.
So I'll tend to think about some of that stuff a little bit ahead of time. And again, just a framework, an outline. This is how I will make this decision, so that when panic day comes, I've got a roadmap that says, okay, when you were thinking clearly, this is what you said you were going to do. Now, those assumptions may not hold up, but at least you've got an outline and a draft of, okay, this is what my thought process would be on this.
When you're making those thought processes within your framework, do you know all of the assumptions? Or are you in there going, I've got some assumptions, and you find out later you had more than you thought? Or you got, did some come back and it's like, oh man, I can't believe I didn't catch that one?
I'm typically on the other side of it. I typically think things are going to be worse than they end up being. Maybe that's just my nature.
You know what? I'm going to totally agree with that right now.
I mean,
it serves you well. Don't get me wrong. It serves you well.
Yeah. Some people have told me I'm a little too conservative about decision making sometimes.
I'm not sure who that is.
Yeah,
who is that person? We might need to talk to that person. But yeah, I there certainly are times where it's like, wow, we missed that, and then there's time. I think it all evens out, right? And look, it does. It really, no, actually, yes, it does, and I'm totally on board with that, and completely agree, because it doesn't matter. I mean, you're either too late to the party or you were too early to the party. Either way, you got to the party, which is pretty impressive in and of itself most of the time. I mean, in this world that we live in, and you take time and I take time, and I know there are other people out there that actually take the time to sit with and understand what might be going on, even if they're not ready to make a decision yet. I mean, you're sitting with stuff and letting it percolate. I'm sitting with stuff and letting it percolate. So are other people, and we're not making decisions right away, which is also in our favor.
Yeah, a lot of it. I mean, this is a lot of thought process that really came out of when I worked around private equity. Mm-hmm. And I think I always just approached it from the standpoint of, I never want to have to stand in front of that board and say, yeah, I didn't really plan for that. And, that's right? Just not a good answer in that arena. It's not an acceptable answer at all. And winging it is not an acceptable answer. No. I always found that if you said, look, this is what I did, and this was the information I had at the time I made the decision, we can discuss whether or not it was good or bad, but it wasn't made on a whim.
Right.
Fast forward to today.
Yeah.
I don't have a private equity board to answer to, but I have a team of employees that I have to answer to, because they're looking to me to say, hey, are we going to be okay? Or we also going to have jobs 6 months from now, or where's this company going, or whatever it may be, crisis or not. I think, you still have that responsibility. It just comes from a different direction.
We here at Red Direction can only fund programming with the financial help of our supporter listeners. To learn more about the additional benefits and value supporter listeners receive, go to reddirection.com. Now, back to Jess.
Your team is remote, right? So we have that in common. Our teams are remote. And I have to say, from our conversations, I am impressed with the way you are able to keep your team focused. I have not been as successful at that. And only because we have people not in the US that are in really bad situations, more so than I had ever thought possible. And so my question to you as a leader of a remote team, what do you think you're really bringing to the table that you've done that helps your team stay focused?
Well, I think the number one thing is to be authentic and transparent about what's happening. Don't, if you try to sugarcoat it or make it into something it's not, I mean, people can tell, you know?
Yeah.
They're going to sniff that out. People are going to sniff that out in a hurry, whether it's employees or customers or whatever. And I think one thing that, and maybe I'm crazy, but factually that's probably true. But I think it's okay to say you don't know. I think it's totally 100% fine if you're being honest and authentic about it to say, look, we don't really know where this thing's going to go, but here's what we're doing. And here's some good stuff that's happened. Here's some, not so great stuff that's happened. You know, I feel pretty good about it. Our runway looks good right now. You know, we can take a pretty big punch in the face before, we get to a doomsday scenario. We're looking at every available option, no stone unturned. I've spent more time on HR and banking in the last 2 weeks than I have in the last 2 years. But these are important things. It's what happens if one of my team members gets sick. I mean, the first place they're going to look is, hey, what do I do about taking off work? Well, it's someone's responsibility. I don't have an HR department, but it's someone's responsibility to say, okay, this is how we need to approach that situation. And I think that just having that type of approach to it gives people reassurance that, okay, someone's looking at this. Someone is thinking about these things, and we're not just flying by the seat of our pants. And then I think the other thing is communicate. I try to call everybody at least once a week. Some weeks I'm better at that than others, but we're really big on we use Microsoft Teams, and we use it. We have group channels, and there's a lot of communication there. One of the things that I try to do is if we get good customer feedback, we got one today. Customer asked me for something, we gave it to him, and he said, hey, I just want to let you know we're having a budget meeting on Monday, and I'm fighting to keep our consulting budget. And because, we really value what you guys do. And that type of thing, throwing that back out to the team and saying, this is the feedback we're getting from some of our customers. I think that helps rally everybody too. And so far so good. We haven't been sitting around with nothing to do, which is great.
Yeah.
But I think it's the unknown, right? If you let that creep in, it's bad. And I think for us, on my little yellow notepad is if it starts to slow down too much, I got a list of internal projects and just start delving them out. Here, let's work on this. Let's work on this. Just keep yourself busy. This will pass.
So there's some forethought. I mean, even now, even in the midst of all of this, when there is more unknown than we ever thought possible as this started to come on board, and we collectively, everybody, you're still taking time and you're planning on a regular basis and you're checking in on a regular basis to make sure the assumptions or the conservativeness is in check and still in the place where your cone is good. You're in the cone of your spaghetti map, if for lack of a better description.
No, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I want to know, because, we're talking about right now, and this is great. We need to know right now. We need to have these examples. Stuff like this, though, happens to each of us in our own journey. It's never happened to as many people at once ever, I think, in the scope of humankind, that we have had to deal with something on this global of a scale with this kind of global connected marketplace. Yet, we've all, on our own journeys, faced this kind of uncertainty before. And I want to know about a time that you really did face some uncertainty, that you look back and recognizing where we're at now, you're like, man, that was really similar to this. Or, holy cow, it was not similar at all, but boy, did I face something really unknown.
Yeah. So I gave you this story about this 5-month supply chain thing that we're working with somebody on right now. I actually lived it in 2012. I think it was 12. Yeah, it was 2012. And we had, man, it was just a weird time in that market. Everything was going along fine. And all of a sudden, a bunch of commitments that customers had made just fizzled. And I'm talking $20 million worth, right?
And overnight, like almost overnight?
Well, when you're talking about a 5-month supply chain, 2 months is overnight, right?
That is overnight, yes. That's
right.
true.
So,
and $20 million is big money.
Yeah, it was. And so, one of the things like, people, for instance, people look to us to help with inventory planning, which is fine. And I love doing that, and we enjoy it. It's right, a good fit for us. But we try to take it a step further and make sure that the people that are doing that planning and writing those POs understand the implications to the larger company for making a really bad mistake. And maybe that just comes from me having lived through it, But anyway, the story is basically that we got to the end of the year, we had an inventory target, and we blew it by $20 million because we already had the stuff coming. I mean, it wasn't like we could tell the manufacturer to not ship it. It was on a boat already on its way, because a lot of this stuff was coming from countries where the sailing time is 55 days, right? So it's coming. Can't do anything about it. And you're looking at it, and you're looking at what's coming, and you're looking at the sales not hitting, and you're going, am I about to run this company out of cash? Because that's, even though it's like I wasn't sitting around twisting my mustache trying to figure out a way to put him out, put him out of cash, but you still feel responsible because it was your plan.
Right.
And, and there was, a major freak out, and, and all of us freaked out, and it ended up, there was a very exhaustive review of how we approached it from outside parties. And fortunately, the reality of it kind of hit everybody eventually. And we all understood, look, we can't just make these assumptions that these things are going to happen. We got to have something to back it up. And, it was better days after that, but it was look, we had moved 900 miles away from home. I'd been there for a year. I thought, this is it. I'm out of work in a place I don't even want to live. So, yeah, it was pretty intense, but,
so you went through, you had the review. What was your biggest takeaway from that?
My biggest takeaway from the review process, so they send in a turnaround consultant. Okay. This is like guy.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, that's now, okay. So that's serious. Okay.
Yeah, and it wasn't that he wasn't coming in to be the interim CFO or nothing like that, but that was their specialty, right?
Yeah.
They did those types of things, but they had a relationship with our private equity sponsorship. So they said, look, just go down and see what's going on with this inventory problem, right? And this guy and I actually got to be really close, and I learned a lot from him. So my biggest takeaway from all of that was, you've got to create a no surprises environment. I stopped obsessing about not letting bad things happen, because sometimes they're just gonna happen. You don't want them to, but it's gonna happen eventually. Something bad's gonna happen.
Right.
We're in the middle of a double black swan event right now. People may not realize that that's what it is, but that one black swan, like those don't happen that often. You have two of them back to back. That's huge.
Yeah.
But so you can't control that. It's going to happen. So I started focusing on visibility and line of sight. If my line of sight today is 30 days, what can I do to turn it into 45, 60, 75, 90? What can I do to build models and projections that say if X, then Y, so that I could directionally tell people, look, if we don't make a course correction, we're going to have a $6 million problem. I can't do anything about that. But if we don't make a course correction, it's going to be a $30 million problem. So how do we close that gap as much as humanly possible? And be real about it. Don't be an alarmist. Don't be, that was another thing I learned, was really trying to take a lot of the emotion out of it, which is really hard to do. It's a lot easier in my gig now, because I don't work for any of them. I'm there to help them.
Yeah.
But it's like I'm not involved in the middle of the firefight every single day, so I can kind of come in objectively, and I don't have everybody kind of giving me their viewpoint on it. I'm just extracting their information and bringing my own kind of unadulterated opinion into it. So that's a lot easier now than it used to be. But yeah, that was it. It was just realizing that if you could get a little bit longer line of sight, and you could make a projection or make some assumptions and say, look, we're going to be in a range, we're going to be somewhere between here and here. And if that's not acceptable, we got to find a way to move that delta a little bit, one way or the other. So, yeah.
Well, and with that story, going back to all the things you shared with us about what's going on at Atlas right now with what you're doing with your clients, it sounds like you've put it all into practice this time around, which you were already thinking about things and understanding certain benchmarks and then there were cues. I'm guessing there were some sort of cues for you at some point that said, okay, I have to put more attention on them now.
Yeah. And, I think I have to thank the governor of California.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that was the trigger point, was because he issued the first really statewide, at least the first one that I remember, they were the first ones on the statewide lockdown.
Yes.
Now,
said, we're going to stop these things. Yep.
And so I watched it reported on the news, and it was mind-blowing to me the way that it was reported versus what it really was, because we have a couple of key customers in California, and I'm like, oh man, they've just been put out of business by the state of California. How are they going to do that? And so like I went and found the actual executive order on state of California's website and started reading it. And the biggest paragraph, the one in the middle, is the one the news left out, where they started carving out all these essential industries, right? And so you go look at the list and you're like, there's 16 of them, and it covers a really wide range: construction and primary metals and medical and all of these essential industries. And you're like, okay, it's not a complete shutdown, but stuff like this, people hear it, it causes a panic. People are going to start to react because we're very much in a everything is in blurbs, right? Details are really hard to come by, and social media, for all of, you can discuss whether that's good or bad, but social media promotes talking in blurbs and headlines. And sometimes that's great, and sometimes it's not so great, because the devil really is in the details, and especially on stuff like this. And so that was kind of my trigger point of going, okay, this is getting serious. They're shutting down 20% of that economy. We have really got to amp it up. We need a plan, because I'm laying in bed 2:00 in the morning going, I just hired 3 people. Is this going to put me out of business?
Right.
Am I going to have to send them home?
Right.
And then that kind of goes from that fear to a little bit of panic to, by about 3 a.m, it was anger. And then, by 5, I had my coffee and I'm like, that's it. I'm done. I'm not going to be a victim. We need a plan. And that's,
Well, I got to credit you. You're the reason we're having this conversation on Uncharted. You were the one who were like, I'm staying up. I'm staying up at night. I need to talk. Let's talk. Who else is staying up at night?
Well, I can't be the only one.
You are not the only one. I am also up at night a little bit more than I used to be at this moment in time. And I think that that's huge. And so I want to say thank you for that, because these kinds of conversations are ones that, we talk about all kinds of things, and we can go get information about all kinds of things, but nobody's really talking about the importance of what it actually means now. So everybody's after the fact. What do we do now? How do we show up now? Instead of going, what did we do and can we rely on to move forward with some sort of knowing, even though we might not be, it makes me think of, I don't remember which Indiana Jones movie it is. It's the one where he has to do all the challenges in the mountain, and he has to decide, he has to get across the thing.
Last Crusade.
Yes, thank you. And he's looking at this thing, and he has to figure out how to get across. And he's like, I have to have complete and utter faith here. And of course, then it dawns on him, he ought to just kind of send some dirt out and just see what actually happens. And he's like, aha, And I think, isn't that kind of what we're doing right now? We're like sending that little dirt out going,
Yeah, I mean,
this bridge here.
it's really weird. And I never, I mean, there were already economists talking about a recession coming in 2022, 2023, somewhere around there. So you're like, okay, I got a year or two to get this figured out and get a plan together. And then like 2 weeks later, it's like, oh no, we're gonna have it now. And I'm not as ready as I'd really like to be, but maybe you never are. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, I did a webinar yesterday, and it's one that's attended by all different people from within these businesses. So you had people there that were just, they're buyers, they cut POs, and you had purchasing managers, and you had CFOs, and so this really wide range. And so you get from that, everybody's always going to ask you questions from their own line of sight, right? So you would get questions like, hey, how do we adapt our min-maxes to deal with what you said here? And, that's a very granular, technical, tactical question, right? And then I had a question of, hey, how do you see the presidential election impacting where we go from here, right? So it's just this huge range. There's a guy that he was a colonel, and I don't want to mess this up because this is actually going on the internet. I think he was in the 101st Airborne, and he was a brigade commander, I think. But anyway, his name is Jimmy Blackman. He does speaking engagements and stuff now. Wrote a really great book about his time in Afghanistan, and he does a really good job in his speaking engagements of relating business to being in the military. That really resonates with me because I was in the military, right? And then about a year before I heard him speak, I had heard a keynote from David Petraeus at another convention I went to. And so it was funny because here's Petraeus, this 4-star general, talking about his surge strategy in Afghanistan. And the number one thing was get the big ideas right. Okay. And then he's got other things in there too. And then you fast forward a year or so later and you hear somebody that worked for him during that time saying the most important thing you can do in these situations is get the big ideas right. I'm like, okay, that's a good chain of command because the general got it and the colonel got it. And that's good. And I love that, though. It really is about getting the big ideas right. And so when we look, I could have gotten hung up on anything I wanted to in our business, right? Are we going to have enough projects? Are we going to get enough ticket issues coming in? Are we going to lose customers? How many customers we're going to acquire? All of this stuff. But big ideas. The big ideas is cash keeps you in the game. So everything needs to be about not going cash flow negative or not going negative for so long that you run out of cash, right? So that became our big our ability to generate cash flow. Well, one thing you can do is put yourself in a position where you understand your customers might get pinched and they might not pay as quickly as they used to. That doesn't make them a bad customer. It makes them in the same situation that you're in. How do you make it easier to pay? How do you give them more options? How do you extend your own runway so that you can help them extend theirs? How do you come up with different ideas to say, look, we really want to do this project, but it's just not in our budget? Well, okay, how about if we start it in the 3rd or 4th week of the month and we'll cut the billing and do it on 2 sides, or, whatever we need to do, because we know you need the project. We want to help you with the project. We don't want you to go away. Right. So we got to figure out a way to work together to make this work. And so that was our big idea of, above all things, if we have enough cash to stay in this game, we're going to be all right. And that's where the 2 ideas of don't go out of business, don't lay people off came from, was to accomplish those 2 things, we've got to get cash flow right. And
you really have to know your customer. You have to know your market. And you have to know business to be able to ensure that's possible. And so I hear you talking about a lot of different skills that are really necessary right now, that if we have them, and I'm using we collectively, everybody, we may need to brush up on them, or we may need to face them in a different way, or we may need to show up and actually get better at them so that we can do what we need to do right now.
Yeah, I think so, but I think there's a little bit more, and the more is you got to find people you can talk to, that you can trust, and who are going to give you unbiased, just objective, this is what I think, the conversation we're having right now, right? So, I mean, as well as anyone, I don't make these decisions in a vacuum. I don't just say, okay, this is what we're doing, and we go do it. I do put thought into it. And then, I've got my quote unquote board of advisors that I'm interacting with and saying, okay, guys, this is what I think. What are you guys seeing? Directionally, is this where we want to go? Sometimes that's the path we go down. Sometimes we adjust course a little bit. Sometimes we scrap it and do something else. But I'm a big believer that all of us are smarter than any of us. Yeah. So I think, it's great if there's somebody in the organization that's got vision and can think, 6-7 chess moves ahead, but that's got to be bounced around, because there's always going to be unintended consequences. There's always going to be everything. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I love being in a position where I can just make that final decision and go. But the hardest part about being in that position is unless you self-impose it or go find some, there's no accountability. So you've got to, for me, I thought it was always really important. I've got to have someone holding me accountable too, because I do have those responsibilities to team members and to my own family and all of those things to make sure we have something that's viable and it's just bigger than one person, so.
Thank you for adding that, because a lot of people who listen, they want to do it in a vacuum. So to hear you talking about what your situation is and how you're approaching it and saying, I'm not doing this in a vacuum and I don't have to, and I choose not to, is powerful.
Yeah. I mean, look, I didn't wake up knowing that one. I had to learn that one the hard way a few times.
Don't we all? Don't we all? Maybe somebody can learn from.
Yeah. I mean, but there's a tipping point, and I've had a very interesting ride through my business career. And, I started out really, I started out where I was responsible for my sales territory. That's it. I could do the whole job myself. I didn't need anybody. And, moved into another position, pretty much could do it all myself. Didn't really have to rely on anybody. Next position, well, I had somebody and I needed to rely on them, but I could also brute force my way through it. And if they completely fell on their face, I could clean up the mess and deal with it. So I could still work in a vacuum alone. You get in a position where you've got 12 or 15 direct reports. That job's too big. That job has become too big for one person to do. You have to start learning how to rely on a team. And I didn't do so good at it the first time. At least I mean, there are things I look back and go, oh, man. I mean,
I can relate.
Poured gasoline on the bridge before I lit it. It was like, it was not worth it. And so you go into the next gig thinking, these are the mistakes I will not make next time. And then the next one, you do the same thing. And hopefully you get a little bit better. But I think, when I really started taking my own situation with the business of having my own very seriously, that was where I was like, okay, I have to put a team of people that I can trust around me that are going to tell me, dude, you're crazy. That is not where you want to go. Or would be willing to say, would compliment my weaknesses. I know marketing's important. I'm just not that good at it, but if someone can give me some guidance and say, look, go this direction, then we can execute. And that's how we've tried to build this company, is by, getting the right people into place, let them do their job, getting input from as many places as you can, but not letting it become analysis paralysis and say, okay, the time, I've gotten everybody's input. I'm clear, it shaped my thoughts this way, but at some point you have to make a call and say, this is what we're going to do, right, wrong, or indifferent. That's where we're going.
Do you ever feel like you suffer from analysis paralysis?
Not anymore.
I was going to say, since we've known each other, I do not feel like you have analysis paralysis.
No, I don't. I mean, I feel inklings of it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I've put these 5 scenarios in. Do I want to add 6 more for these other assumptions? Or, hey,
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
on
Yeah.
V6 of the budget. It's time to put it down because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, 1% either direction is not going to make any difference. So
Yeah.
I think it's just kind of that little OCD piece that sneaks in
Okay.
sometimes. But, you know, not really anymore. I think for me, I just want to know that we have a plan and that we're executing on the plan.
Yep.
And if we need to adjust down the road, let's adjust. But that's not a week from now, right? You don't know enough a week from now to say, oh, we got to make another course correction. It's
You got to write it
things
out. There's an
you've got
element,
to.
and this is actually something where your experience I mean, I've never been in a situation where I've had to wait 5 months for anything. I'll be completely honest. I could change
It's
direction tomorrow and bring everybody else with me my entire career, whether I've had nobody under me or 30 people under me. And and so I get that there's a lot of people out there like me that don't have that experience, and we think a week is too long to wait. And I know now, being working on myself as much as I have, surrounding myself with those great people that just are like, come on, Jess, or look at it this way, or this is where you're really strong, stay there, is that waiting it out has value. And waiting in general has value. I mean, we can't wait forever to the analysis paralysis, but we also don't have to make a decision because we have a decision to make.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to challenge you back. You've seen me have that problem. My first hire. It probably took 6 months longer than it should have, and I seem to remember that you were very candid with me about having that issue. So
Well, but and here were the other things though. I mean, you're absolutely right. So pushing back, that's true. And I was candid. Yet at the same point in time, you were really focused on your strengths. And so we focused on your strengths until you were
true.
ready, because sometimes you can't go faster than you can actually go.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
and I actually think that there were some other things going on that were okay, that did not, in terms of other vendors and things that you used. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
right?
It ended up working out. Yeah, for sure.
It worked out, but in the end, it was kind of like you were feeling out a couple of different things all at once. And
yeah.
So yes, I did. And I was very candid. And at the same point in time, Andy, I also recognized that you were actually working, what does this actually look like? How do I want this to be? And until you do it for a while, you don't
True.
really know. And you never, and you're not one to bite off more than you can chew in that way, in a way that will put you at a detriment. You're one that bites off more than you can chew to move forward.
Yeah, no, for sure. But the whole 5-month lag thing and the patience and writing it out, that it's hard to explain what that's like. I mean, it's the best way I can explain it is it's like watching a tsunami come in at 5 miles an hour. It's like you get for days, and months before it happens, and you're just like, oh man, this is not going to be good. This is not going to be good at all.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it's hard because everything moves so fast now, and that's not a bad thing. I don't fear that, but it's like we can't change the business plan every week. What we believe is our core strength, that hasn't changed. And the pillars that we built our company on and our core values, that hasn't changed. So if it got us here, of course the business has got to evolve over time and all of those things. I totally respect that concept, and we do what we can to evolve, and we have different things that but at your core, if those things are still correct and right, and that still points your compass toward true north, then abandoning it in a time of peril is the worst thing that you would want to do, right? That's, you just can't abandon that part of the ship. You've got to stay true to that, because that, I think, is what gets you through. If your core values are actually really, truly meaningful to you, and it's not something your marketing company said these should be your core values, right? I mean, you gotta live it, and it's got to be the right thing, and it's got to be something that everyone exudes, and everybody understands this is the direction our compass points, and all things we do have to be in alignment with this. That's hard. I mean, because you get challenged. Authenticity is one of ours, and it's real. There's a lot of temptation always to not be authentic, because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or, oh, that's really not our problem to get involved in. But you know what? If you saw it and you let them get blindsided over it, that's your fault, and you can't be that way. And I don't know. I think there's enough of that in the world right now. I think maybe we spare each other's feelings a little too much sometimes.
I really want that to be the end of the show, but there's something else that has to be said, and I don't know what it is. What is it, Andy?
I don't know. I mean, I guess, the high points are, for me, I just don't want to fly blind. I need to know, I think I've said it a couple of times already, whether the plan is right or wrong, you're not going to know that till the end. If you need to correct it along the way because your assumptions were just off, fine. But you got to go into it with a plan, and you've got to at least give yourself the peace of mind of saying, as long as we're doing this, that's acceptable for me. And it may not be optimal, but we're not going to go out of business. We're not closing up shop. We just got to get through this. And that's real easy for me to say as a professional services organization. If I owned a restaurant, it might not be so easy for me to say that. That's a whole different ball of string, And my heart goes out to those people, because that's just awful, to basically be forced out of business in an instant. But from that, I've seen some amazing innovation of companies adapting to that and finding better ways to change their interaction with their customer. And that is another topic of conversation that we're having a lot right now with people, is how is your interaction with your customer going to change over the next 6 months, a year? Because it's probably going to change forever. And people in our business, it's a big change, because a lot of our business is face-to-face.
Yeah.
That's gone right now. But what if it stays largely gone forever? How do we change the way we deliver services and interact with customers in a meaningful way to, still give them the value that they need, but do it at a socially acceptable distance?
We here at Red Direction can only fund programming with financial help from our supporter listeners. To learn more about the additional benefits and value-added supporter listeners receive, go to reddirection.com. Chart your own course by taking advantage of Red Direction's Unstuck Quick Consulting Services and our vast library of information on the website. Visit reddirection.com. Remember, preparedness and the right perspective